I'm Trevor Bechtel. I'm the Dean here at Conrad Grebel. I'm very happy to welcome you here tonight as we celebrate Mennonite writing for a final time this academic year. Throughout this series, my job has been to welcome you and then quickly introduce Rob Zacharias, who is the Banting Postdoctoral Fellow in the Department of English Language and Literature here at Waterloo. Tonight, I would like to go off script. This series, in my mind, and I think in the mind of many of those of us who have been able to partake, has been a resounding success. And this is thanks to the excellent work that Rob has put into it. He has built on the good work of many people to bring us this series. But I need to tell you that what we have been enjoying over these weeks is his product. Rob conceived of this series, sought funding for it, arranged to bring us this feast of literary delights on his own. The vision and the connections needed to make this happen suggest that he has truly taken on the mantle of a next great literary critic of Mennonite writing. So please join me in thanking Rob for these events. And now I'd like to turn the microphone over to Rob.
Well now, thank you. My name is Rob Zacharias. I am the Banting Postdoctoral Fellow in the Department of English, Language, and Literature at the University of Waterloo. And I have the honor of introducing Carrie Snyder to you this evening. Yes. So I should begin by welcoming all of you once again. Tonight is the final night of the Mennonite Writing 2014-2015 series, so if I wax just a little bit nostalgic, you'll have to forgive me. I'm happy to acknowledge one last time the support that's made this series possible. In all ways, Conrad Grebel University College has been an active and eager partner and supporter of the series, particularly through their Institute for Anabaptist and Mennonite Studies. The University of Waterloo's Department of English, Language, and Literature, where I'm currently based, has been a generous sponsor as well. And I'm also happy to acknowledge the Banting Postdoctoral Fellowship Program that continues to fund my time here. I've also been so pleased to have the University of Waterloo's bookstore come on board for the series. They're always just outside the door here, professional and ready as ever, and they're here again tonight, and I'm most appreciative for their efforts. And I'm also pleased that the final 4 readings of our series, including tonight, has been funded by the Canada Council for the Arts. So my thanks go out to all of these institutions for their support that makes it possible to bring in these authors and for us to enjoy their work. There is, however, one final or an additional set of thanks I should pass on tonight. That's to Hildy Fraze-Thiessen and Paul Thiessen, who have graciously hosted many of the traveling authors at their house. I was a little anxious about this at first. Hildy said, they can just stay with me when they come. I thought, okay, how will I propose this to the authors? And the first one who I thought I'll kind of float the idea with was Patrick Friesen, and he quickly laid to rest any concerns that I might have. He told me, oh, no, don't worry. Paul and Hildy's house, it's a literary institution in its own rank already. Now, I'm confident that that is true, but I still don't want to take it for granted, so we are most appreciative. So, has anybody managed to make it to all of the readings in the series? Anybody at all? I do see a couple of smiles. I didn't even manage to make it to all the readings in the series. So let me just briefly take a moment to sort of cast our eyes back over the last 6 readings. I guess tonight will be the 7th, so we have a sense of the conversation that we've had. Way back in October, we had Rudy Wiebe join us to kick off the series with a reading from his latest book, Come Back. Rudy gave a candid interview that night, and the challenging nature of the book about a suicide made for me, at least for me, a very powerful and memorable evening. The second reading of the series was by Jeff Gundy, who joined us as part of the Bechtel Lecture Series, and Jeff read from his new book of poems, Somewhere Near Defiance. It's very much a book in the vein of his larger body of work. That is, it's poetry that's very accessible and yet at the same time is reaching towards the heavens. It's writing that is funny but always comes with a surprisingly sharp edge. The fall session ended with Miriam Taves in November. This is one of Miriam's first readings at a Mennonite venue such as Conrad Grebel, and I remember she expressed some hesitancy on the way up. I was absolutely thrilled with how warm and engaged the evening was with a standing room only crowd in the Great Hall. Her remarkable new novel, All My Puny Sorrows, had just been awarded the Writers' Trust Award for Fiction, and we enjoyed a memorable evening. We kicked off the new year with Patrick Friesen. Patrick read in his fine, deep voice from a new manuscript of poems, A Short History of Crazy Bone, and he joined the Grebel student body for a compelling reading at the community supper ahead of his event. Next came Di Brandt, who also debuted a new manuscript entitled Glitter and Fall, a creative translation, she says, of the Tao. I particularly enjoyed this reading and getting a chance to chat with Di about the trajectory of her career and where she thinks it may be going next. Now, David Bergen was the penultimate reader in the series, and he is one of my very favorites. So I was very sorry to have to miss hearing him read from his fine new book, Leaving Tomorrow. I did manage to watch the video, which is on the Grebel website, so I feel all caught up. But thanks again, of course, to Hildy for filling in the hosting role so admirably. And all this brings us back to tonight. I'm so pleased to be able to conclude the series with Carrie Snyder. It seems in some ways only right, given that she's a graduate of Conrad Grebel, and she lives here in Waterloo. Her first book, Hair Hat, a collection of stories, was published by Penguin in 2004. It was shortlisted for the Donato Glee Award for Short Fiction and has recently been re-released by the House of Anansi Press. Her second book, The Juliet Stories, is one of my very favorite books from that year. It tells the compelling story of Juliet Friesen, who's just 10 years old when her family moves to Nicaragua to begin protesting for peace. The Juliet Stories was a finalist for the Governor General's Award for Fiction in 2012 and was selected as a Globe and Mail Top 10 book. Noting how closely the story of Juliet seemed to follow aspects of Carrie's own life, a reviewer in Descant briefly speculated on which parts might be fiction and which part might be real before correcting herself. Quote, Snyder has written the truth so beautifully and so powerfully, she said, it overrides any reality. As an aside, I taught the Juliet Stories last summer at a grad course that I was teaching here at the University of Waterloo, and the students absolutely gravitated toward it and really enjoyed it. Her third book and first full novel, Girl Runner, was just released in the fall of 2014, also by Anansi, and it's this novel that brings us here tonight. Of first coming across Girl Runner in manuscript form, the senior editor at the House of Anansi has said that, quote, it was one of those fantastic moments that you have as a reader, when you feel that compulsive need to just keep reading right to the very end. She added that it was, quote, one of the fastest and easiest acquisition decisions I've ever made. Little wonder then that the book would go on to light up the publishing world at the Frankfurt Book Fair, quickly being picked up for publication in Germany, France, the Netherlands, Italy, Spain, and Latin America, and Sweden, as well as the US, UK, and Australia, and France, and Turkey, and Catalonia. So in other words, you can get the book wherever you are. So I think Carrie's reading tonight should give you a sense of about the buzz of the novel, and she'll tell you a bit about what it's about. But let me give you just one more quick sense about how it's been described by reviewers. It was shortlisted for this year's Writers' Trust Award, and the jury citation there called the book, quote, a witty, poignant, finely plotted novel that offers us a character possessed with the wisdom that arises only from a life well lived. Quill and Choir called Girl Runner a, quote, beautiful, thoughtful homage to the forgotten women who stepped outside the boundaries of what was allotted to them. And this recent one from the UK's Daily Mail, quote, right from the start, the voice of Agatha Smart, now aged 104 and living in a home, grabs you. And it doesn't let go until the very last page of this original and moving story, end quote. Carrie's also an award-winning blogger under the increasingly ill-suited title of Obscure Canlit Mama. So, as is our custom, I have asked Carrie to read for about half an hour or so. We're going to do things just a slight bit different today. I'm going to invite her to come up first. She'll read from her new novel, Girl Runner. Then I'll join her. We'll have a quick little conversation about the work and some of the stuff that she's been doing. And then she'll read for a few more minutes from the Juliet stories, because I really wanted to hear from it again. And then after that, the university, you'll have a chance to ask questions, and the University of Waterloo's bookstore has joined us, as I mentioned, and set up shop outside the doors of the chapel where they are selling Carrie's books after the reading. I will invite her to sign copies of the work there, so do consider picking up a few copies. So as I mentioned earlier, Carrie is a Grebel alum, so please help me welcome her home. Carrie.
Thanks, Rob. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. Hildy, you didn't invite me. I'd come spend the night. I didn't know. So Girl Runner, as you may already know, but I'll tell you anyway, is the story of a talented and celebrated Olympic athlete, a runner famous in the 1920s. But it's also the story of a woman growing old and her accomplishments forgotten by history. So I'm going to start reading tonight from the very beginning, which I don't usually do. But I have a little bit more time this evening, so sit back, relax, and I'll read you chapter 1 of Girl Runner, which is called Visitors. Coming, Aggie? Fanny squeezes my fingers. We walk the dusty lane, her hand around mine. Fanny is not like anyone else. She moves like water in a muddy creek. We stop to gather wildflowers, ripping their tough stems free, the delicate flowers expiring in our hands. Tall grasses vibrate with heat. We cut a path through the raspberry brambles and along the edge of the front field planted with corn. The corn is taller than my head, taller than Fanny's too. Fanny's hair is falling out of her bun. Wisps halo her. I look up into her face like the face of the moon, looking down into mine. We are going to the graveyard. We are always going to the graveyard. Here we are, Fanny says in a comfortable way. I climb the mossy split rails. Dark and grooved, the wood is cool and damp against my knees. Fanny enters at the gate. Hello, everyone, she says. Hello, boys. Good morning, Mother. I leap from the fence and drop the dying wildflowers. My job is to clear away the crab apples that fall from the overhanging trees. Fanny hitches her skirt, swings it out of the way, and kneels on the grave to pick it clean of weeds. That is her job. I throw handfuls of crab apples, making noises like guns firing, like grenades exploding, like I imagine war to sound. Our brother Robbie is at war. My half-brother, Fanny's full. Fanny pats the grass to call me closer. I chew open a crab apple, spit it out. Born too early, Fanny begins. I know her stories by heart. Born too early, she repeats, waiting for me, sitting now on her bottom, arms gathering her legs into her bosom. Their skin was thinner than crepe, blue as baby birds. She's got me. I kneel and brush the grass over the twins, buried together in a tiny square coffin. I can almost see its outlines under the ground, of thin, dark wood pressed on all sides by the weight of the earth. Were they boys or girls, I ask. Fanny is waiting for me to ask. Boys, of course. But I already know, and her answer still gives me the shivers. This is a graveyard of dead children, all boys, my half-brothers. I am relieved to have been born a girl. The twins, the first and second babies born to our father, Robert Smart, and his first wife, who was Fanny's mother, not mine, and whose name I know was Tilda. The twins lived for a minute each, not even an hour, let alone a day. Next born came Robbie, who was alive and well and fighting in the mud fields of France. His letters home are scant on details, but for the mud. He writes that his feet are always wet and that the boys suffer from foot rot. Some of their toes turn black. I would like to know more about this. I'm thinking about it now. Do their toes fall off? I ask Fanny. Whose toes? The boys in the war in the mud. Robbie doesn't say. Can you write to him and ask? I don't yet know how to write. I think we have nicer things to say in our letters, don't we? Robbie doesn't want to think about his toes falling off. Maybe they've already fallen off. He would tell us, but I wonder, would he? I look forward to inspecting his feet surreptitiously when he's home again, whenever that may be. The newspaper says our boys will be home by Christmas, but Christmas is a long way off. After Robbie was born, along came Fanny and then Edith, a string of good luck. Fanny is older than Edith, but Edith is no longer at home with us. Last fall, she married a man named Carson Miller, and they live across the cornfield on the next farm over. I like to close my eyes and see Edith standing under the arbor built by her father for the wedding. I think she looks beautiful, and I don't understand why my mother grieved over the bareness of the arbor. In my mind, Edith stands alone, holding fresh-cut, late-blooming flowers, her newly sewn dress tight at the wrists and close at the neck, a raven blue hue. Fanny moves to the next grave, pulling me along with her. I poke at the initials in the flat stone, scraping away flecks of moss with my fingernails. Here is another boy. After Edith was born, the string of good luck came to an end. Fever, says Fanny, her fingers plucking at weeds, only 6 months old. But 6 months isn't only, and I know it. Edith's baby is already 6 months. I get to haul his squirming, protesting self as often as I please. I might go whenever I want, so long as I tell Mother. At home, I'm the youngest, and I like the novelty of being in charge of little Robbie, named so as to tell him apart from Robbie, my brother, and Robert, my father. But I feel torn on visiting Edith. There's something unfinished about the house and yard, and it feels different from home, strange. Edith's vegetable garden is half the size of ours and weedy. The flowers grow scanty in their beds as if they've given up trying. The house is cramped and smells of damp and dirty laundry and soup. Edith greets my surprise arrivals with an irritated, "Oh, Aggie," flushed and hurrying, her hairline damp with sweat. She never sits down and she never offers me a cookie. Maybe she doesn't bake any. She hands off the baby and rushes to other business, not baking cookies, muttering to herself. Little Robbie and I go a long time without seeing her. It's like she's disappeared until he's howling and I'm hot and cannot soothe him and my arms ache, and I feel like howling too. This is when Edith pops into the scene. There you are, annoyed, as if she's been looking and looking everywhere for us. So I might go as often as I like, but I don't go very often. Fanny is shifting her weight slowly from the baby who died of fever to the next grave, the grave that grieves her most of all, the one we've been moving toward, little James. It was haying time, says Fanny, drawing out each word slow and plain. Maybe he was hot and wanted cooling down. Maybe he was lost. He was only 2 years old. How did he find his way across the back field to the pond? Drowned before we even knew he was missing. That's how fast it happened. That's how fast it can. Neighbor boys fishing at the pond discovered James floating face down in the water, and they pulled him out and ran screaming to the farmhouse, carrying him between them. When they set him down in the yard, little James was not yet stiff, the life fresh out of him. I was 7 years old, says Fanny, older than you. The neighbor boys, they're in the war now, but they were just boys then. Jerry and Jack, I can hear them hollering. They laid him on the patch of grass by the summer kitchen door. Everyone came running, my mother falling down over him, trying to lift him, telling him to breathe, please breathe. And then I knew he must be dead. So I ran and hid in the barn in the mow under the straw. The shock of it broke my mother's heart. For a moment, I forget that when Fanny says my mother, she means the first mother, not mine, and it jolts me to think, even for a breath, even mistakenly, that my own mother's heart might be broken by anything. None of my mother's babies are dead. None of the graves are hers to mourn. I believe this is because my mother gave birth only to girls, 3 of us, Olive, then Cora, and me, Aganitha, last of all. I have decided that my mother is nothing like the first mother. The first mother, Tilda, I mouth her name, is fuzzy around the edges, shrouded in black netting from all her years of mourning. The stories about Tilda are not really about her. She is in the background, weeping for her dead babies, and then suddenly she's buried too. Puerperal fever, says Fanny, but that's not what I hear, and so I imagine the first mother purple from scalp to toenail when she died. All of this happened almost at once. Little James drowned. Our brother George came early, so tiny we kept him in a drawer, and the first mother died. I imagine Fanny hiding under the straw past dusk, refusing to come out like a kitten in a nest. Who pulls her out? Fanny doesn't say. Nothing so sad has ever happened to me. It was James drowning that killed my mother, says Fanny. I don't think it was George at all. George wasn't to blame. I know what she's going to say next, and I wait for it. I was supposed to be watching him, Aggie. Watching him was my job. What was I doing instead? We're nearly done. In another moment, I'll go back to gathering and throwing crab apples. There's just one more thing Fanny needs to say as we kneel here beside each other. Thin yellow hair lifts from my scalp. I can't see my own face looking up at my sister's, and don't know that it is wildly freckled, and in my silence looks long and carven. Fanny is both smiling and serious. I'll never stop watching you, Aggie, I promise. There. It is the clearest air, the quietest sky, the hummingest bugs. The sun shines. Friends here to see you, Mrs. Smart. The nurse has woken me. I've been lying in a shallow drift of sleep, not an unpleasant place to linger, and it is with irritation that I'm wrenched back into this room, surfacing into a pattern that has the sensation of being chronic. Wakey, wakey, Mrs. Smart. My mouth is dry, lips peeling off each other as I open them to say again the obvious, I never married. I keep telling them, but they do insist on Mrs., as if I've cause to be shamed by my spinster state. Do they practice their chirping in the mirror, these nurses? This one is arranging my sweater like I am her plaything, a dried applehead doll she's crafted herself and would like to show off to someone who's come to play. I hear myself looping. Goodness, why now, Mrs. Smart, we have a lovely surprise for you this morning. Friends come to see you. Isn't that something? She's got me there. I would have to agree. I would have to call that something. Who would come to see me? I don't know anyone anymore. Everyone's dead. I'm trying to explain that I am very thirsty. I've got her by the wrist, but she's stronger. She evades me and goes around behind to unlock the brake, and she begins pushing the chair out of the corner where they've arranged it beside the window that is never opened, and that steams opaque with moisture on chilly days. The radiator mumbles. I don't mind the spot. I'm thirsty, I croak. No, she doesn't hear. She bends with hushed excitement and breathes into my hair, what's left of it, tufted like the threads of root on an old red radish. It's a young man and a young woman come to visit, Mrs. Smart. They'd like to take you for a stroll, and what a lovely day for it. We'll bundle you up with blankets and tuck you right in. I've forgotten their names, but here they are. Smile, Mrs. Smart. Say hello to your friends. I refuse to do as I'm told on principle. The scent of scrubbed skin rushes toward me. I feel a hand alight awkwardly on mine, as if it's afraid of elderly bones and tendons and veins, as if its owner might break me. Hair swings loose and shiny, a flash of red between our faces. The girl is saying a name, and it isn't mine, though it might be hers. It means nothing to me, no bells, no symphony of recognition. Louder, dear, she's nearly deaf. Aren't you, Mrs. Smart? But we know she can hear us. Can't you, Mrs. Smart? She's not completely lost in there. Hello again, the girl says to me, and then to the nurse. It's been a while. She might not remember us. I don't reply. And you know Mrs. Smart from? The nurse's question trails off. I could tell her because I'm quite sure this girl doesn't know me from a stranger off the street. She couldn't possibly, young as she is. Everyone known to me is dead, buried, departed, gone, X'd from my life, ties severed, bridges burnt, lost, misplaced. It's a long story, I hear the girl say. She adds that she's a distant relative, but her laugh is nervous, a kid's laugh. The girl is lying, I decide, trying to parse a rumbling under my breastbone that might just be excitement. I've been sitting in this chair for years, day in, day out, as the light outside the window fades and lengthens and fades again, and the seasons trail, and the sky grows dark with snowflakes and flat with summer's glare. Every change here is incremental, which makes this girl's arrival monumental. She is speaking, not to the nurse, but to me. Coming? She asks, as if in my wheeled chair I have some choice, some agency. She touches my hand again, her fingers sliding under mine, around mine, so lightly I only just register the pressure of her hold on me. I say to her, "You remind me of someone. Come closer, I'll whisper it. Fanny." Fanny is still so young. She's stayed the same, and I have not. But when she visits, her face always turned away from mine, hidden behind her hair, behind a shadow. I feel the girl in me, the years dissolving. I feel the comfort of her, my big sister, offering her hand. Coming, Aggie? She has been dead nearly a century, but she walks effortlessly across the undulations of my mind. Hair loose, hips broad, apron bleached white. Coming? The girl's touch brushes the skin on my wrist like an offer, waiting for me. I slip my hand into hers. And that's the end of chapter 1.
Should I try again?
Hello?
All right.
Move my hair.
Can you hear me in the back? Yes? Lovely. Well, thank you very much, Carrie. Thank you for coming and agreeing to read as the final reader in the series and for sharing from your book this evening.
Pleasure.
I was, one of the things I like when books like Carrie's get picked up internationally is the multiple book covers. You get this whole range, excuse me. There's this whole range of book covers that come out, and you get to sort of trace the different imaginations of the ways that the editors or whoever it is, the designers, come up with it. But they also come up with some different titles. And I was just flipping through some of the other editions that you have on your website, and I noticed the Dutch edition, which I won't try and pronounce the Dutch, but it's pretty easy, I think, to translate it in that it says the Rosebud Athletic Club for Women.
Yes, totally different.
Totally different, right? And what really struck me would be when I read the book, and certainly I think we get a sense from the first chapter, is that it feels like the story of Agatha Smart, of an individual person. But just that subtle shift in the title, not subtle, the big change in the title, made me rethink the book a little bit. Mm-hmm. And thinking in some ways that's quite accurate. It is the story of this Rosebud group of women and this remarkable time and moment of this whole collection. And so I wonder, when you were writing it, there seems, when I was reading, kind of flipping back through, I was like, right, this is a story of, in the sense it's one person's story, but there's also a sense in which it's very intentionally a group of women.
Yes.
When you're writing it, does it come across as one, are you thinking I'm writing one person's story and there's other cast of characters that come in? Or is it that you want to tell the story of this remarkable moment in Canadian history?
Well, I think it's actually a bit of both, really. So I started with the voice of very old Aggie, as I call her. And I heard her, and then it was a matter of figuring out what story belonged to her in the past. And I knew she would be a runner. And so I did some research on the history of women running. I had initially, before I ever heard Aggie, I had initially thought I might write about the period in the 1960s, early 70s, when marathoning was sort of just beginning and women were trying to break in to the sport and were being not allowed to run. But then I heard Aggie, and she was clearly coming from a different time period altogether. And to be quite honest, I was not actually aware that the 1920s was this really fascinating time for women in sports. And so when I started to look into it, it was quite obvious that it was really just a fascinating period.
It's an amazing story.
I studied some women's history and did some women's studies courses, and I'd never come across that. I think we think now we've reached some kind of height for women in sport. And sure, if you play tennis or golf, I guess, there are a few individual sports where you can earn money similar to what men earn. But the fascinating time about the 1920s is that there were these sports teams happening, and women's teams, and there was hockey as well, there was softball, there were track and field teams, and people would go to the events and pay to go see, women playing softball. And it was reported on in the newspapers. I suspect it's because there wasn't the professionalization of sport as a kind of an entertainment industry, so that there was room for it. But there also obviously was something going on that was allowing women to join in too. Yeah, it was just a fascinating thing to
This
discover.
is sort of moment which opens up.
Just a moment.
And then
it got closed right back down again. Yeah.
it is a fascinating cast of characters, and I know in the conclusion, or I guess the afterword of the text, she sort of lays out a little bit of the history, which is absolutely fascinating. And there is the one rock star woman, Alexandrine Gibb.
Yes. Yep.
Who you held on to as a character.
I did. So Alexandrine Gibb, she was herself an athlete, but then she became involved in being more of a sports administrator and also a sports writer. And so she was the manager on the team that Canada sent to the 1928 Olympics in Amsterdam, which is what the book is sort of about, one of the things the book is about. So that was the first Olympics where women were allowed to compete in track and field events, just a few, but it was opened up to women. And Alexandrine Gibb was the team manager, but she was also working as a sports writer for the Toronto Daily Star, which is the newspaper that I happened to order on microfilm when I was researching the period, and I wanted to read specifically stories from the Olympic Games and what was, like, just read it directly from the newspaper.
At this time, did you know that this was going to be a story?
Not exactly. I was just curious to know more about it.
Okay.
And I really like to go right back to the actual, like the newspaper, whatever source material I can find, and not have it mediated by like a historian, just go right back and look. And so I'm flipping through and reading, and actually Alexandrine Gibb's stories about the Olympics that she was sending back were some of the first that I read. And it really felt like I couldn't change her. She needed to be there, and she needed to be who she was.
Yeah.
Which I can't say has actually happened before, that I actually put a real person in. Now, I didn't try too hard to make sure that she was exactly portrayed as she was, but yes, she's definitely there.
So it's interesting, you've got this character who stays true in terms of you keep her name.
Yeah.
You have a sense that her voice is important for the story. But you also said earlier that Aggie's voice comes to you and that you had to tell that story. I find that such a fascinating way of describing a book. I imagine it to be much more mundane, or either that or some sort of amazing act of genius. But you have a sense of a voice. That's where you started with, a voice that sort of.
I would have to say that's where I always start.
Is that right?
Yes, yeah, the voice is very important.
Is it a voice of a particular character, or?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it tends to be a bit of a slow discovery. So a lot of what I write in the early stages of writing a new project gets thrown out. It's like I'm just trying to get to know the character. But I would say for me, plot has always been secondary. And so that was my challenge for myself when I was writing Girl Runner, was to think more about plot in addition to connecting with the character, which is just something that comes very naturally to me.
Yeah, because in many ways, Girl Runner is a very different book than Juliet Stories. So Juliet Stories, if you haven't read it, is this novel in stories, I think.
That's what they call it.
That's what they call it.
Yeah.
So it's a series of short stories, effectively, that are, it's the same character, and it follows her life. And there's definitely a narrative arc to it, absolutely, and there's themes and so on that we can trace throughout. But it's more impressionistic or imagistic, where it creates a very clear sense of mood, and it's really it's quite an accomplishment, really. And so the plot there feels secondary to the voice and sort of the writing itself. And in Girl Runner, there's this strong sense of plot that becomes very central to the character. And so often we find writers who have their voice, and you can, they kind of keep writing the same book in some ways. In this way, it's something very different. Was that intentional? Do you want to do something totally different, or is it again just the voice that comes?
Well, I would have to say again that it's a little bit of both. So the character definitely came to me, but after the Juliet Stories was published, so I was sort of working on Girl Runner in the very early stages, immediately after Juliet was published. And then I kind of dropped it because I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. And when you get into the sort of publicity stage of selling your book, you just can't focus too much on trying to write something new. So I had sort of dropped it and set it aside, and I wasn't really sure what would happen. But in the meantime, I had read some books that were more plot-oriented, just kind of entertaining books, and I started to think I would actually kind of like to write a book more like that. I was telling Rob earlier that I like to set challenges for myself. I like to do something different with everything that I try.
Reinvent the wheel each time.
Exactly. Because I don't know. I get bored easily. I don't know. I'm endlessly curious. I just wanted to see if I could do it. And so then that became part of writing Girl Runner, was definitely thinking more about plot. And to be perfectly frank, that after the Juliet Stories was published, I started to realize it was published only in Canada, the Juliet Stories. It was shortlisted for the Governor General's. I didn't earn very much money from it, which is the case, I think, for most writers who publish in Canada. And I sort of saw Girl Runner as my Hail Mary pass down the field, like am I going to be able to stay a writer? And I wrote with this real ferocious kind of, I'm going to get this thing done and see what happens. And I let myself, in a sense, write a plot-driven book. Like I think I had to give myself permission to do that.
Why? What do you mean by that?
Well, I tend to be more literary in my tastes even.
Okay.
So I think there was a part of me that was feeling snobbish about, oh, there's a surprise at the end. It's wrapped up. But I like reading books like that, so why wouldn't I like to make a book like that? And why would I not want to make a book where people want to turn the pages and find out what happens at the end?
Yeah.
But I think I did actually have to give myself permission to be a little less literary. I'm sure my agent was so happy.
So you're conscious of yourself throwing a Hail Mary pass.
Yeah.
At what stage do you know it's been caught? That this has worked.
Well, you never know. Oh no, you don't know.
So you
I
don't
don't
know
even
halfway
know
through
now,
this has worked.
honestly. Well, I mean, it's been. You really don't ever lose the anxiety or the doubt. That is just. I'm totally at peace with it, though. It's fine. It's part of the writing life.
Okay.
I think, in fact, it's the anxiety and the doubt that fuels the writing of the next book. That's what makes it exciting. So, sorry, I lost track of what your question was. When do you know? Okay, well, I did realize that Girl Runner would be potentially, had the potential to have success, or at least to sell to publishers. When my agent called me as soon as she read the manuscript, she was very excited about it. But I sent it to her in complete, I had no idea. I just said, I have no idea what I've done here. This feels sort of different. And here we go.
So you write the entire thing, you hold it over and just hold your breath.
Oh, yeah. I know, there's no security whatsoever.
She's excited, and then it goes through Nancy.
Yeah, but it's this very slow process, right? So I think people think that there might be this great moment. If there was a really exciting moment, it was when it sold in the States to the U.S. editor. And that was genuinely extremely exciting because I knew that would shift my career potentially. It's a much bigger market. And there were actually a couple of different editors who were all very interested in the book, and it was this kind of bidding thing, and it was really exciting. But it was also terrifying. Like, I actually felt, I remember when my agent called me and she said, "Carrie, I think you need to sit down before I tell you this news," which was that the HarperCollins had made a preemptive bid. And I was like, "Oh, no, I can stand up." And she told me, and I said, "I'm sitting down right now." And then I think I almost like walked through the next 24 hours in this kind of daze. Like I felt almost numb, like I didn't have an emotional response to it. It was almost like I've been trying to be a writer and planning to be a writer for my whole life.
Yeah.
I have set that as my path and trajectory. I've worked really hard on it for, at the very minimum, say 20 years. And then to have that kind of phone call where you're given this news that you've been waiting for so long, I don't know, it was a very peculiar moment.
Carrie blogs very regularly, and it's fascinating to kind of follow along because she blogs right through things like award season and writes with remarkable candor about this. And one of the entries was, I remember reading, was when you talk about the career path, there was questions for you about that. Do you want to share a bit of how that process went for you?
Well, while I was writing Girl Runner, I was also applying to midwifery school, and because I had realized I wasn't necessarily going to make a living as a writer, and I wanted to start contributing financially to our family. and so that was quite an intensive process to apply in, and then I was accepted into the program. And
which is difficult. That's not, like, it's hard to get in.
It is hard to get in. Actually, the process was fascinating. I had to go to this interview session with all these other potential candidates, and we were thrown into different roles. We weren't thrown in, but we walked into these different rooms, 10 different rooms. You had 10 minutes in each room. You had a complete stranger sitting there with a question that you had no idea what the question was going to be, just thrown at you, and you had to, on your feet, try to find a solution or talk somebody through something. Like, you literally had no idea what the scenario was going to be. It was incredibly grueling. But anyway, so it was quite thrilling to have been accepted, but it was literally the same day that I received my acceptance from McMaster that the Canadian publisher was making their offer.
Oh.
And so it was a crossroads.
Yeah. Was it a difficult decision?
Yes, it was very difficult. I didn't make it immediately. I couldn't decide because I had decided so strongly that I was going to choose this alternate path.
Yeah.
And I'd come to terms with, I actually thought this would be the last book I would write for a number of years, and I'd sort of accepted that that would be the case. But then once I saw where this book was likely to go, and I realized this is what I have worked for all these years, this is not the time to try to change paths. I need to stick with this project and carry it through, because if your book doesn't have somebody behind it speaking for it, you know, it can just sort of vanish.
Well, I'm glad you stuck with it.
We shall see.
Well, that's right. So far, so good. So some of you may have heard Carrie speaking this morning on was it yesterday morning that it aired?
It was yesterday.
On CBC Radio on the morning show, in which you discussed, among other things, tonight's reading. And I was intrigued by your the host's question, or your answer to it, I should say, about how that your Mennonite upbringing has informed your writing. I'm assuming he saw the title of the series and he wanted to ask. But you noted that all three of your novels, or books, I should say, have characters who are, you said, quote, choosing to live beyond the margin of what's normal. And you make a connection there between your characters' earnest efforts to live out their convictions, even if it's strange or unusual, with a larger Anabaptist insistence on faith that must be expressed in life. And I thought that certainly rang true to me, at least in light of, or especially in light of the Juliet stories, where there are these characters with Mennonite last names, many of whom sort of scoff at the conservative faith of their parents or their grandparents, but nonetheless find themselves running around the globe, throwing themselves in harm's way in the name of peace. So as you probably know, there's a number of the authors in the series that we've had that have sort of complicated relationships with the idea of Mennonite literature or Mennonite writing. I'm just interested to know, in light of the comments that you had earlier on the radio, if you have a sense of something broader of Mennonite literature, or if it's just something separate entirely from your own writing experience.
Oh, I feel a little strange being called a Mennonite writer, honestly, because I'm Mennonite because my parents were both Mennonite, and I was raised in the Mennonite church, but I haven't chosen to really participate in the Mennonite church as an adult. Although I've tried here and there, but I don't really. So it does make me feel a little bit strange, also because I haven't chosen to write about Mennonite subjects. So I guess that's why the producer who spoke to me was very keen on Mennonite, and so I have actually thought quite hard about it, and I recognize that one of my persistent themes is the outsider, the person who's willing to look peculiar, stand out, be judged, and yet somehow can't. It doesn't prevent them from doing what they need to do, which I think is very much the character in Girl Runner, that she doesn't exactly know what she's motivated by, but she just knows very strongly who she is, and so she has to act on who she is. And so I think that does connect to the Anabaptist tradition of being willing to be outside the margins of what's perceived as normal.
I'm going to invite you to read a little bit more from, I think, the Juliet stories. Is that right? I'm going to scamper over there. And then once she's read for a few minutes, we're going to open the floor up to questions from the audience. So if there's anything you'd like to ask Carrie about, do get those questions ready.
Do I read from the podium, or shall I just read from here? This feels very casual somehow. I'm reading to my kids or something. So I'm going to read a story that I have never read before, because it's the last story in the Juliet stories, and when you're taking a book around, you somehow feel like you shouldn't read the last story. Not that this is a plot-driven book, as we mentioned before, but anyway, I've never read it. I probably will cut little bits from it, but read most of it. It's called Daniel Ortega's Wristwatch. Pick up all the little pieces that do not fit. There are at least enough for one more story. You have Daniel Ortega's imitation gold wristwatch slipping sideways, too large for the slender bones of his wrist. You have children at sunset and a lost island, and the pitch of your mother's laughter as she returns from an evening out. Laughter has woken you and comforts you deeply. Your father laughs in return. They're laughing together. But you can't find what you're looking for. What are you missing? Is it your grudge, your urge to confess, your rage, your trouble, your righteousness? Can't you leave the little pieces to shrink and wither and drift, to be knocked to the floor by a child's elbow and accidentally vacuumed up? No, you can't. So you pray, you practice, you work, you stretch your body regularly and lie upon the floor, hearing your heart pound in rhythm with your lungs. A month is like an hour, and an hour is a month. You live for years until it comes to you. How you have loved sifting the little piles for clues and premonitions. You don't want to come to the end. Tell me, do you remember what it feels like to be young? Your birthday has come and gone, and you measure your age on your hands in two outspread suns. The symmetry of numbers enchants. You have memorized the multiplication tables in your new language, and they are forever cast in this form. 8 por 6, 48. 8 por 7, 56. The natural world is both literal and magical. You make a camera with your fingers, framing every scene you want to keep. Click. One of the grown-ups has taught you this trick, because real cameras and film are rare. You believe in the technology. You take hundreds of pictures with your hands. On car rides, you close your eyes and drift through the album in your mind. Many photos are of horses, thin, bony, stark, in deep, dry fields of grass. You are drawn to sunsets and water. You take a picture of the dank and rotting house you and your brothers have constructed against a concrete wall, stinking palm branches swarming with flies. Here is the front porch wall against which your bare feet have crashed and stopped you hard when sliding the slick red tiles in a rainstorm. Why keep these things? You do not think the way a grown-up would, this too shall pass. You gather not for need or market value, but for pleasure, much as you and your brother collect bottle caps, and later, when he is sick and you are not, the shared loot of coins and stamps and baseball cards. You enjoy arranging them in symmetrical piles according to characteristics and rules based on your own interests by color, or type, or year, or by an arbitrary and personal hierarchy from favorite to least. Their existence is comforting, and the pleasure of placing them in your own order pulls you toward the ground, sits you deeper inside calm and solidity and self. You think none of these thoughts. Without agonizing, you do what feels right. Escape. You are not getting away from it all or running away or leaving it all behind. That's what a grown-up would do. You have entered another dimension, elementally free in thin shorts and a t-shirt, the wind lifting your braids and lake spray light on your lips. A fisherman pilots the motorboat that is taking you and your family to an island among many, a place you've never been. You disembark. The boat tilts with weight dispersed. If you fall into sweet green water, it is as warm as your own blood. There are sharks in this lake, the only freshwater sharks on the planet, and you would like to see one. The fisherman catches fresh fish for your lunch and guts them, roasts them over the fire. Your dad slings a hammock between trees and relaxes, a large man in short swimwear. He drinks rum and cokes with your mom. Your hands grip rope hanging from a branch, and you swing out over the water, drop down, plunging all the way under, drenched as a sea rat. It does not rain until late afternoon. There are hundreds of tiny islands in this lake. You could live here with fire and a hammock and a net for fish or sharks. Everyone imagines it, even your parents. Your parents are talking about a dream, but you are not. You are talking about something that could actually happen. You are talking about possible worlds, parallel lives, the ones you will live in throughout your life, slipping sideways and through the membrane that separates the noise and substance of your finite life from the sweet, calm inertia of your forever lives, the ones going on beside you, drifting and holy and unchanged despite the passage of time. You are on the boat. Your face is wet. The boat rocks to a lull, and you step onto this island, and you are here again, warm, barefoot, wiry, at play with your brothers, and your parents are here too, without a care for the day, without grief or rage or blame. This is not an illusion. This is still happening, and you know that it is because you can find it in your mind as easily as closing your eyes and letting go the rope, the fibers scratching your palms as you hang for an instant between sky and water, as you fall through and under and hold your breath, your knees folding to meet your belly, your hands spread in front of your face, and your eyes wide open. Where are you right now, if not here, too? The stones beneath your feet are cool, wide, washed by the warm salt water of the Pacific Ocean. Your bare soles are tough, and your toes grip the slippery rock effortlessly. All around you breathes the humid falling of night. Earlier, following the afternoon rains, you ran the solemn wild shoreline, believing you could catch the rainbow left behind. And now, a phosphorescent, thunderous sky of layered orange and black draws in as you watch, exhilarated, belly full of fresh fish and fried rice, eaten at a thatch-roofed shack way back there. flies landing on the lip of your glass pop bottle, blowing them away. Your brothers stand beside you. You pause in a ragged row and look at the same sky. Click. 3 children silhouetted against a pier palette, vivid shadows. The waves beat a steady wash against the rocks, and out there someone is swimming the water. Behind you, when you turn to shore, a grown-up's heavy camera swings around his neck. Whose, you cannot remember. There are so many of them, and you feel such intimacy, such knowing. It seems you should recall with absolute clarity who stands where and does what. But the details are mutable. Anything you put down on the page will be wrong. You are here. You spring out of the camera's frame, splash into the waves, crouch, slip your shoulders and head backward and down until your face goes under and comes up, rushing with salt water tilted to the sky. The tides carry danger. You don't know what undertow means, but feel it viscerally in the body. A quiet power beneath, waiting to grab you and pull you under, where no one will hear when you open your mouth. Your hair is wet rope, and your bathing suit clings to your stomach, and it is almost time, almost, to leave, but no one wants to go. So you'll stay. You'll pick this up and keep it, as the photograph is kept, printed and framed and packaged, and mailed to a new address in another country where it hangs on the wall by the stairs, a little askew no matter who tries to straighten it. It is a beautiful photograph. Guests remark upon it. You think, I don't know where that picture ended up. You look to the pile on your desk, but while you were typing, it has scattered. The windows are open, and a breeze pulls out like tide receding from shore. You see Daniel Ortega's wristwatch in the teeth of a squirrel scrambling across the streets on a wire. Your mother's laugh has been caught by a girl passing on the sidewalk below, a cell phone pressed to her ear. The tide pulls. You cover the keyboard and stand. You climb onto the window ledge. It isn't high. Without pause or hesitation, without listening for the cries of your children, you spring onto a shifting cloud, and toes pointed leap on strong legs to another and another and another, higher and higher, until this house is a red and black speck, and the trees are smudges of smoke, and the sky is an ocean, and you swim like forever.
Really love it. It's such a great illustration of how the different hats that you can wear as a writer. Just the images. I don't know how many of you have read from the rest of Juliet's stories, but there's just key images that just rise to the surface as I hear you reading that. Are there any questions for Carrie? Please, Kyle.
Thinking of those images, I find that you're able to describe places that I'm assuming are familiar without heavy romanticism in a way that just seems really familiar. How do you manage to avoid that over-romanticizing of these books? How do you resist the urge to really make this place special and make it real instead?
Ooh. I don't know. That's kind of like asking how you write, I guess. And you know, that story, which I haven't read for quite a while, I mean, I haven't actually even read it for a while. It's kind of how I write, like that feeling of being very inside the moment that's being described. I feel that when I'm writing. Like I'm definitely in a deeper place and in my imagination, and I'm walking through something and I'm just writing down what I see. And then I might go back and edit it later, but maybe that's what makes it feel real, because I feel like I'm really there when I'm writing whatever it is I'm writing. And some of the places are invented, but those can seem real too. But this book was sort of sold by my publisher as a semi-autobiographical book, and it is in many ways based on my own experiences, because my parents were peace activists and we did live in Nicaragua, but I made up a lot of the actual stories that happened. But if I were to pick out a story that was the most autobiographical in the book. It would be that one.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Our guide class had a lot of fun reading the acknowledgments at the end. It's just the acknowledgments. That's kind of, she really wrestles with the question of autobiography. Any other questions? Please.
You write so vividly in the natural world, and especially in Girl Runner, the setting, the warm setting. I know that when you were about the age of where Agatha's age of getting the story, you lived on a farm for a while with your family, is that right? I wonder how much your powers of observation have any connection with that.
Well, the house. I feel like the house in Girl Runner is its own character in a way.
Yeah.
And it is actually the house based on the house that we lived in for about 5 years. I was 12 when we moved there, and it's near Ayr, Ontario. And there was a peculiar thing that happened when I was researching the 1920s, and I wanted to just look at pictures in order to, I sometimes prefer that than I get a visual. And I was looking for details like what are people wearing on their feet, and what are the hairstyles, and buttons, and I don't know, those sorts of things. And so I'd taken a bunch of books out of the library, history books, including, it was actually from the kids section, and it was a book of pictures from Canada in the 1920s. And it was really thin, actually. There's almost nothing in it, but it was just one among many I grabbed, and it sat at home for a while, and then one day I just picked it up and started flipping through, and I saw a picture of our house.
Your house.
Of that stone farmhouse. And I had just chills running up and down my spine, because first of all, we were, I think, the first family to live in this house after the original family had moved out. The farmer next door had bought it and was using it basically for farmland, and he rented out the farmhouse to us. And it just brought this flood back of that place. And in fact, what I could remember from the family, but we didn't know very much about them, but I did remember that at the end, when right before the farm was sold, that there were 2 sisters living in it. And I mean, right away, I realized, okay, that's Conrad and Aggie. They're in that house.
Yeah.
It's one of those bizarre things that you can't really explain.
Yeah.
But when you're writing, I feel like I'm often so open to things that they just come in and become part of it. But absolutely, I was thinking about that place when I was writing the book.
The house retains its sort of uncanniness in the book, for sure.
Oh,
for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, it's a little bit haunted.
That's right. Yeah. Other questions? Please.
I'm wondering how you managed to find the voice for old Aggie.
Yeah.
How did you ever find the voice of a 103-year-old? That's
She's even older.
Yeah.
104. Yeah.
Did you actually sit in a wheelchair for a while? I'm just curious how you got there, Carrie.
That is such a popular question, and I wish I had a really good answer for it, and I really, really don't. I think I just thought of her like any other character, I guess. I mean, I just knew that she was very, very old, and I just imagined myself into her, I guess, because that's what I would do with any character. And in a sense, not that everybody's exactly the same, but that we all at core have these emotions that we feel that we can all understand. So I think that's what I was thinking about when I thought about her, was just, and I'm not that old yet, but I have spent 40 years here, and what amazes me is how little I feel, how little has changed. Like, I don't think I'm going to feel all that differently in another 40 years, because I still feel very much like I felt at 12 or 8 or 20. All those parts of me are still there. And that's one of the fascinating things about getting older is realizing that at any point you can recognize what it's like to be a 12-year-old, because you can remember that. You remember in a very keen way what it's like to be all these different ages. So it's almost like you carry all the ages within yourself.
Well, I think it's a particular gift to be able to imagine yourself forward into other characters and to vividly remember who you were at 12, and then another set of skills to be able to write so beautifully. So to be able to have both sets is really makes for good writing. I think we have time for one last question. All the way in the back.
Carrie, my name is John, and I have a bone to pick with you and then a question.
Oh, no, bones. Okay.
I finished your book when I was on a business trip in Europe. I was jet lagged and had that cold. And when I finished the book, this is go back to the bowl, you made me proud. Now my question about can you imagine inhabiting or receiving the voice of a male character and writing it with the same sensitivity and clarity that you did with your female?
Well, that's a good question. This book is clearly, there are not a lot of men in it, and the men aren't all that well portrayed. But in a sense, that was kind of deliberate. It was deliberate, though, to do that, because so much of history is from the male side. And I thought,
Yeah.
fair enough, this is a woman's story, and I think it's okay to kind of write the men out a little bit. Hair Hat is about a man, but again, he's told through the eyes of others. One of the stories is through the eyes of a man in that book. I haven't had a lot of male characters kind of come knocking, I guess. And I don't know if I would do a good job of it. I really don't know.
Yeah.
On the other hand, maybe so. Maybe I could. I don't know. I'm waiting.
Well, the woman's voice is so core to this text, and for the
Yes.
story you're telling.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Before I close and let you get to the booksellers out back and ask Carrie to join us out there, I should thank you all once again for coming out to the series as a whole, for your patience with me and as the host and as we've gone on the journey together. It's funny, Trevor, you mentioned earlier the project and my work with it. I should, while we're confessing things, I should say that last summer I was thinking about how many of my favorite authors were publishing new books this year. I wonder who I could convince to pay to bring them all out so I could listen to them and chat with them for a while. So I'm glad you think it was a success, because I've been feeling guilty the whole time. So I hope you enjoyed the readings, all of them, as much as I did, but particularly tonight. Please help me thank Carrie for joining us.